Hello? Oh, this is how it works. Okay, I'm back. And to make long story short, I'm an anthropologist. I used to work in the Russian Arctic, and it's not a very scientific term, I think, but somehow when I say Russian Arctic and the Western Arctic, then this is important in my case when we talk about indigenous people and indigenous activism. But I don't think it's very academic terminology right now, and so sounds in some cases maybe obscure. But just to know, as you know. Okay, I used to study then the Russian Arctic. Over a quarter of a century, I worked in the Russian Far East, and then happened the Ukraine-Russian full-scale war. And for many reasons, out of sudden, I was then unable to go to the Russian Arctic. And it might sound pretty easy that once you have the experience studying indigenous people in the Russian Arctic, why don't you go and do it somewhere else? And this is not so easy. So there are fundamentally different organizations, different ways to approach people, and different attitudes, and you just cannot switch over that easily. But it was somewhere late mid-90s. I was a student then. I lived in Germany and studied in Berlin, and we had a conference about the Arctic in Halle, which is a small town south of Berlin, and there used to be still is very important foundation, which has a history in dealing with the Arctic or Arctic research. And on that conference, there were then people from Russia, scholars, and there were also few people from Finland. They were Sami, so they worked for a Sami indigenous organization, and they came in, had very clear idea what they should talk about the indigenous police, indigenous cultures in Finland, and they also had with them a bunch of materials to hand out, bulletins, leaflets, so on and so on. And you saw the difference between the Russian and, let's say, then Scandinavian indigenous people. These Finnish Sami, they looked very well organized. Plus, you saw that they had money to sort of support the organization, but also print all the leaflets and things they need. And on the left, there is a Estonian designer, Liis Roden, who does T-shirts, among others. And then the story is that when I went through her catalog, I found this T-shirt and ordered it immediately. And I think this picture encapsulates very well when we talk about colonialism in the Arctic. And basically, for me and for many of us, I believe it's not so complicated to understand what the picture means, sort of bringing civilization, culture to these savage natives. But Liis then wrote me that she created this design 10 years ago, and I was the first one to order it. So basically, that also shows, as she wrote me, and then you as an anthropologist came and noticed it immediately. I think it also shows that the whole discussion about indigenous identities, colonialism, decolonialism, is pretty much unnoticed by a lot of people. And here I put the so-called working definition for indigenous people, the UN one. And this very important definition, I'm going to go into it a bit later. It has to do what also Indrek told about Võro case. But when you see, then there are those terms, pre-invasion and pre-colonial. So basically, indigenous is officially, or I would even say semi-official, because this is the working definition, but very important definition, because, for instance, a lot of indigenous activism is based on this definition, including then Indigenous Forum at the UN. The pre-colonial or colonial and invasion are pretty central terms. And my first encounter with the Western Arctic indigenous activism was in Greenland. Last February was a very interesting conference. And the conference was interesting because there came together a lot of Sami activists from all over Scandinavia. There were Inuits, some people from South America, plus a lot of these politicians, economy guys, European Union functionaries. And you saw, and I noticed a few things. One thing was also that when indigenous activists all over came together, they pretty much grouped and didn't want much to do with the others. And when I was in the Nooks, my first day of arrival, I lived pretty close to that sort of district of these houses. And they look pretty run down, sort of ghetto-like settlement or sub-settlement. And I was told that these houses are the symbol of decolonization in Greenland. They were built in the 50s as part of decolonization process, where Greenlandic Inuit was also declared as an official language of Greenland. And Denmark then started what is called now decolonization process. 11 minutes. And this is, and when we, okay, I do so. And Vladislava and Indrek also told a little bit, so I don't have to repeat myself, what is the decolonization process, how people mean it. And it's, when you are inside it, in this sense inside, that you have experience with the Arctic and have also been there and lived with the people, then it's not that complicated, but that on the one hand, decolonization process is kind of reversing the colonization process. Reversing the process when indigenous people were, not only in the Arctic, were forced to give up their culture, land and language. And I saw in Nuuk, in museum, pretty perverse video clips, what Danes did. So the process of civilization of indigenous people, it's not only that, let's say, was done in US or Canada or Russia, black and white sort of film clips from the 20s or 30s. They dressed Inuit people in Danish folk costumes and made them to dance Danish folk dances, and that looked really, really sort of surreal, you know. And another way, when you look what demands indigenous activists make, then decolonization process also includes, this is what Vladislava said, so this future element, futuristic element, so basically to give an opportunity to become a modern sub-nation, which means indigenous people in the northern hemisphere, they demand access to education, access to modern knowledge, modern lifestyle, in order to use it for them, their help. And one very important part I found here are something I call indigenous scholar, and also those people, they call themselves indigenous scholars. Very good place to meet those people is actually Nuuk, because the majority of Greenlandic populations are Inuits. But you can also go to Tromsø, Norway, where there's special Sami House of Culture faculty and so on, and in a few other places in Scandinavia, there are places where you have special educational programs for indigenous people, with a focus on indigenous people. And what makes indigenous scholarships different from the sort of standard academic scholarship is that this is, I would say, semi-academic scholarship. And one of the books, when you're interested, I just put it here that have a full screen, is from Sean Wilson, which is kind of very important text when you're interested how to do or what kind of people are indigenous scholars. And basically, it means that you don't have this very ordinary academic path when you do your research, then publish it, and then get another grant and then start new research. Indigenous scholarship is community-focused in order to study problems or topics related to with the community, with the aim to also apply this knowledge and kind of solve these problems. And this is what, in huge conference where you have a lot of indigenous activists and scholars, you see it also. There is not much love left between indigenous scholars or from that side to this ordinary academics, and what you hear pretty often is research fatigue, that we are fed up with all those outside scholars who come here, do their research, and then leave. And why it is so interesting, why it is important. In the Western Arctic, it's not so easy to study indigenous people at all, as it is the case in Russia, where you just walk into the village, say, hello, here I am, and we start with the process. Because this kind of traditional scholarship is also seen as form of colonization. And Indrek mentioned a sort of thing, what happened last year here in Estonia, I think, when a group, so-called Võrokesed, some of their activists declared that they are indigenous people. And it caused huge scandal in Estonia, and one sort of debate or clash are now Võrokesed titled to be indigenous people or not, was about colonialism. Can we speak about the Estonian colonialism regarding Võrokesed? And Võro activists made clear pretty quickly, we are not talking about colonialism. But when we look that colonialism is very central for indigenous, let's say, definition, I would say so distinct that this UN working definition is pretty much shaped by Western indigenous activism. So it's very much in the face of North American and Scandinavian notion of indigenous people, because there it's very clear-cut when the colonizers came, who they are, and how they differ. When we go to India, for instance, then it's not so clear-cut because there have been different waves of intruders and settlers. Everybody claims to be indigenous, and plus India doesn't have any legislation defining indigenous. Basically, as Indrek already mentioned, every country has its own legalization or laws about the indigenous people, and they define pretty, and they are different. And I'm very sad that Võrokesed didn't carry over, because I think there is also another very important aspect to be recognized as indigenous people. It means that let's say, international indigenous activist community and organization community must recognize you as indigenous people. And I'd really love to say how Warok should go to this huge conference, because this, again, we have these small nuances, but also Indrek highlighted the appearance of white people going to conference where you have people who see them as sort of victims of white people. Plus, it doesn't come always that quickly. For instance, Canadian Métis, they fought for their indigenous status exactly 100 years. So it's not like you declare you're indigenous and then things can happen. But when we go to the Russian Arctic, then there is no talk about colonialism at all. Russian indigenous people and their organizations, they talk about revitalization of the language, revitalization of the cultures, education programs, but they don't use the word colonialism at all. So basically, the fact that colonialism is central for defining indigenous tragedies and what are indigenous people, this is very sort of Western way of approaching. Therefore, colonialism now among the Western indigenous people is used in very various contexts. There is very little talk about sort of classical colonialism, where people come, take your lands away, and force you to assimilate. But Sami activists, for instance, I've heard them speak about eco-colonialism, windmills, plans about putting windmills on reindeer pastures and things like that. And this itself is a very interesting topic. And I just stop here. I say thank you. And I just want to say, when you are interested in indigenous people and their scholarship and activists, best way to go meet them is in Nuuk. But when you fly to Nuuk, then please make sure you don't have these things with you. Thank you.